Global Stock Market Turmoil, the Worst Crisis in History. By Saqib Hussaini, CEO, Hussaini Analysis and Secretary General, Citizen Council for Human Rights. The global economy is on the brink of an unprecedented collapse. If current trends continue, the world's wealthiest individuals, largest corporations, and major economies will fall. Unemployment will surge beyond control, leading to mass civil unrest and humanitarian crises. As CEO of Hussaini and List and Secretary General of the Citizen Council for Human Rights, I have spent years analyzing economic patterns and their direct impact on human rights, financial stability, and global security. This is not just a financial crisis, it is a turning point in human history. In 2019, during the COVID-19 pandemic, I warned that if nations failed to unite, the economic damage would far outweigh the impact of the virus itself. Now, in 2025, the stakes are even higher. If developed and developing nations do not come together, the consequences will be far more devastating than any crisis we have seen before. The collapse of billionaires and corporations. For the first time in history, even the ultra-rich and corporate giants will not be immune. The financial landscape is shifting dramatically, and this time, the elite will also fall. Corporate bankruptcies on a massive scale, many top multinational companies, especially in tech and finance, will struggle to survive. Billionaires will lose their wealth. Rapid market crashes will shrink the fortunes of even the richest individuals. The fall of Western economies, the US, Europe, and Canada will experience their worst financial downturns, shaking global markets. This crisis is no longer about stock market fluctuations, it is about the collapse of financial structures themselves. Unemployment crisis, a global emergency. We are about to witness a job loss crisis greater than anything the world has ever seen. Millions of people worldwide will lose their jobs, causing a ripple effect that will devastate both developed and developing economies. 1. Mass layoffs across industries, technology, finance, manufacturing, and services will suffer huge job losses. 2. Social welfare systems will collapse. Governments in the US, Europe, and Canada will be unable to sustain their unemployed populations. 3. A rise in poverty and crime. As economic desperation spreads, crime rates will surge, creating instability on a global scale. If urgent action is not taken, this crisis will lead to long-term economic depression and the destruction of social stability. The forced repatriation of Asian migrants. One of the most overlooked consequences of this financial crisis is the mass deportation of Asian workers from the West. As Western economies collapse, governments in the US, Europe, and Canada will enforce strict immigration policies, forcing millions of workers to return to their home countries. Mass deportations, millions of Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and other Asian workers will be sent back home, worsening the job crisis in South Asia. Economic burden on home countries. Developing nations will struggle to reintegrate these returning workers, leading to widespread poverty and economic strain. Political and social unrest. Countries like India and Pakistan will face mass protests as unemployment rises beyond control. This wave of forced migration will create one of the largest humanitarian and economic crises in modern history. The risk of civil wars and global unrest. With rising unemployment, mass deportations, and economic collapse, the world is heading toward civil unrest and political instability on an unprecedented scale. If governments fail to respond effectively, we could witness civil wars and mass uprisings. Weakened economies will lead to revolutions and political instability. Lawlessness and crime waves. A desperate population will turn to illegal activities, increasing global crime rates. The collapse of global order. If major economies like the US, Europe, and India break down, the entire world order will be permanently altered. We are not just talking about financial instability, we are talking about the potential disintegration of modern civilization. A second warning: the need for global unity. In 2019, as Secretary General Saqib Hussaini of the Citizen Council for Human Rights, I urged world leaders to set aside their conflicts and unite to fight the COVID-19 crisis. I warned that without cooperation, the economic devastation would be far worse than the pandemic itself. Now, in 2025, we are facing an even greater challenge. If developed and developing nations do not act together, the consequences will be the collapse of industries and economies, mass unemployment leading to extreme poverty, global wars, revolutions, and civil conflicts. As an economic analyst and a human rights advocate, I emphasize that this is not just an economic crisis, it is a humanitarian crisis. The only solution is for world leaders to recognize this as a shared crisis and work together to implement global economic reforms before it is too late. Final warning: a turning point for humanity. As CEO of Hussaini Analysis and List and Secretary General of the Citizen Council for Human Rights, I have been warning about these dangers for years. Now, in 2025, we are at the most critical turning point in history. If world leaders fail to act, this financial disaster will be greater than any crisis the world has ever seen.